Welcome back to today's podcast. In this episode today, I'm joined by Sean Biker, owner of Breakthrough Bootcamp, and we have a bit of a fun podcast today. So we asked the audience kind of overrated versus underrated concepts, and this is going to be generally speaking, of course, a lot of times, but we'll provide some context to it depending on the topic. And the cool part about this is the answers they're going to be all authentic. So Sean doesn't actually know the questions I'm about to ask him, and I don't know the questions that Sean's about to ask me. And this could be up for debate. We might agree on some things, we might disagree on some things, so it should be a fun episode. Sean, I'm assuming the audience kind of knows who you are by now, but if the audience isn't familiar with you, maybe introduce yourself with the audience and we can jump basically right into it.
Sure. So for those who don't know me, my name is Sean Biker. I'm the owner of Breakthrough Bootcamp, and I specialize in body transformation through simplicity with fitness and nutrition.
Awesome. Since you're the guest on my podcast here, I'll ask you the first question. You're going to say overrated, underrated, give a bit of an explanation. I'm going to jump in after. We'll see if we agree or not. I'll give my explanation, and we'll move on to the next question after that. Sounds good?
Let's do it.
All right, jumping right into question number one. Squats. Overrated or underrated for glute gains?
For glute gains, I'm going to say overrated, for sure. I'm going to say overrated for the main reason being, I think a lot of people don't have the mobility, the range of motion necessary to get down deep enough, because during the squat, you're really going to start to feel the glutes, and the glutes engage at that lower position of the squat. So if you're not able to get down low enough, then it's going to be predominantly a quad-based movement. And there's, especially when it comes to the barbell squat, where there's so many different aspects being into play here, while the squat is a fantastic full body movement, I wouldn't say it's ideal for building the glutes. So you're gonna have to be able to get down low enough. Most people have really tight ankles, really tight hips, tight in the mid back, and they're not able to get down low enough. So squats for glute development, I'm gonna say overrated. What do you think?
I think it's actually very well said. You know, for anyone who knows me, I'm a mobility guy, so I love the reference that Sean gave there. I'm definitely going to say overrated as well. And this is not to say squats are bad building glutes, of course. I'm sure we both agree they're a good exercise to build glutes, but I think the general public overrates them. Like, how many times we see the shirt, like, do you even squat bro, or kind of showing, you know, the glute gains there. Like Sean said, to maximally load the glutes in a squat, we want to get down to parallel, basically with our hips down to our knees, even maybe a little bit below. And if we're restricting our ankles and our hips, we can't maximally load that position, so it's not going to be optimal for that. And like Sean said as well, you're going to get a lot of quad engagement opposed to glute engagement if you're unable to go at a deep depth. So I would recommend, in terms of more glute exercises, a few exercises out of this are some Bulgarian split squats. Maybe we kind of lean that torso forward and we just kind of pre-stretch those glutes a bit more. Any sort of hinging exercise like a hip thrust or a Romanian deadlift or a landmine deadlift, those are fantastic glute exercises. Would you add anything on top of that, or would you kind of get that general consensus as well?
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. I think you're the glute guy, so I'll defer to you in that category anyway.
So that's question number one. We both think it's overrated, and again, we're not saying it's not an exercise to grow glutes, but we just think the general public overrates it in terms of glute gains, in terms of squats here. So we'll get Sean now, and he'll ask me the question number one, and we'll just kind of keep going back and forth, alternating.
Yeah, so this one I'm really curious about. I think I know we're going to go on this one, but I don't know, it could go either way. So the next one is going to be Peloton.
Ooh, Peloton. Is there any context to it, or just in general, Peloton?
Just in general, overrated, underrated.
Okay.
When we say overrated, underrated, we're talking from the general consensus from the public, right? Not in a particular community. So with that being said, you can provide any context you'd like.
Perfect. I'm going to say overrated for a couple of reasons here. Yeah. Number one, I won't get into the price too much, but obviously, of course, it is a little bit expensive. But I think it's just very well advertised in terms of, like, this thing is so good for fat loss. And while it can be definitely a great tool for fat loss, if you're doing the same thing over and over again and you don't really have any resistance training in that fat loss program, that could be not very beneficial. And the more you do cardio, the more your body kind of adapts to it. And you're gonna have to work even harder to burn more calories because, like I said, our body kind of adapts to the stress given to it. And here's a problem as well with Peloton. We're constantly what's called that sagittal plane. So basically just a lot of flexion extension. We're not, of course, moving around, right? We're locked into the bike. We always got a hip flexors on fire. We're potentially around our lower back. So if we constantly do that in Peloton, and we're not kind of moving in what's called that frontal plane, that side-to-side plane, or the transverse plane, that rotational plane, and we're just not expressing too many different movements in our body, that can actually lead to imbalances as well, which can eventually lead to breakdown. So I think Peloton can be used as a general tool for the general public, but it wouldn't be my main course, if that kind of makes sense. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Funny. So I'm going to agree with everything you said, but I'm going to still say underrated.
Okay.
And the reason I'm saying it's underrated is because when I look at the risks to benefits, I think the potential best case scenario is much worse than the potential worst case scenario. So I say underrated because anything that gets people enjoying exercise or anything that gets people to actually start to move is invaluable in my opinion, right? So if someone were to tell you whatever, I don't even know how much it costs, $5,000, but you're gonna spend this $5,000 and you're gonna have better energy, you're gonna enjoy exercising, and you're gonna feel great. You'll take that deal all day, every day. Now, everything that Rich said about the downsides are 100% legit. So it's not gonna be the best thing when it comes to fat loss. There's gonna be certain injury risks as well because you're doing the same movement over and over and over again. You are becoming inefficient at burning calories because you're actually getting so much better. And not to mention, there is that novelty factor where at first when you get it, I'm sure it's going to be a ton of fun, and then the key is, are you going to be able to sustain that months and years down the road? So those are all the potential downsides, and they're all very true. So I agree with everything Rich is saying. With that being said, if that's the one thing that you actually enjoy doing, if you don't enjoy going to the gym, if you're not able to motivate yourself to lift weights, there are better options for efficiency to get healthy, to get fit. But if this is the one thing that you're going to actually enjoy doing, it's going to be the one thing that you're going to actually do to work out, then massively underrated in my opinion for that reason.
I think it's a pretty good way of looking at it for sure. Like if that, like Sean said, having that context there, if that's kind of like the difference between working out and not working out, then I would absolutely agree. Sean says underrated and go for it for sure. And I think Sean hit the nail on the head pretty good too. It's not the most ideal thing for fat loss. That's kind of where I was getting at. But yeah, absolutely agree with Sean in terms of like if it kind of comes down to working out or not working out, then you should absolutely do Peloton, especially if you enjoy it and you find something sustainable. Anything to add to that, or is that about it?
I think that wraps that one up.
All right, I got question number 3. Question number 2 for Sean to start off. I like this question a lot actually, and it's be cardio for body recomp. Overrated or underrated?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
That's a good question.
I'm gonna say overrated. The reason I'm gonna say overrated is kind of the same reasons we were talking about Peloton, where yeah, it can help, but it's not gonna be the most efficient way. So when we're talking about recomp, essentially what we're talking about is lowering your body fat percentage, which is dropping body fat and either maintaining or increasing muscle. So while cardio can do a great job of burning calories and dropping fat, what it's not gonna help out with is maintaining or building muscle. So I think cardio should and can be something that is part of everyone's fitness journey in general, including recomp, but I think there has to be a resistance training portion. And I would argue the foundational aspect of it, if we're just talking about physique here, for exercise at least, strength training and resistance training should be the foundation. And we all know the most important thing when it comes to body transformation is going to be nutrition. So I would prioritize nutrition first, strength training next. And cardio can be valuable, but it's not going to be the most efficient way of getting there. What do you say about that?
I think that's perfectly said. I'm going to say overrated as well. I'll give you a little context too in terms of different types of cardio. But yeah, I think it's very well said in terms of the overall breakdown of cardio. Kind of like what I talked about in Peloton, I think cardio can be used as a tool for fat loss. But like Sean said, the main meat potatoes you want, you got to make sure nutrition, of course, is number 1. And resistance training is second. Because you want to make sure you're maintaining your muscle during a caloric deficit, during a fat loss phase. And if you're not, I know there's a couple of myths that kind of float around, but maybe you can potentially slow down your metabolism. You become not as efficient as burning calories down the road, and that can eventually lead to more of that long-term, I should say that fat gain back down the road. Now, for certain types of cardio, here's what I will say. I'll get a little context on over and underrated. I think jogging and high intensity cardio is definitely overrated. Depending on what we're talking about, which is probably the question I'm assuming you asked. But like low impact cardio, so like walking, I think that is so underrated. I think it's the best thing you can do.
Agreed.
Yeah, for sure. And because I kind of look at it like a stimulus to fatigue ratio. Sprinting, you're gonna like a huge stimulus. You're creating a good stimulus to your body. You're gonna burn a lot of calories, potentially for muscle growth, but there's the high fatigue components. Jogging, medium stimulus, high fatigue. Walking, a little stimulus, basically no fatigue at all. And when you're in a caloric deficit, you want to make sure you're not taxing your body, and that can release a stress hormone called cortisol. So you got to be really important about doing too much cardio into a fat loss phase. Is there anything you want to add to that or not? Or
no, I think that's an important distinction. So I wouldn't consider walking as cardio, but I think it's really important to actually make that distinction, which is why you see all of these Fitbits and step counters as becoming more and more popular, because like Rich said, it's a way to burn extra calories without doing harm on your nervous system, and you're able to still recover from it. So yeah, that would be something I would definitely recommend as well.
Awesome, we're on the same page for that one there. Question number 2 for me, your turn to kick it off here.
Sure, so the next one is overrated, underrated workout splits. Now, for those of you who don't know what workout splits are when you take different days to work specific body parts. Now, there's a few different permutations that we can do here. I'm sure Rich will go into this. Workout splits can be upper, lower. They can be our traditional bro split, shoulders, arms, chest, quads, whatever it is. But I think in general, workout splits, overrated, underrated, based on that context.
So I'm gonna surprise you here. I'm gonna say slightly overrated. And here's why. Kind of like Sean talked about Peloton in terms of like finding something that you enjoy and you can stick to. I kind of have that concept in terms of the split. So whether you're doing like a bro split in terms of like doing a few body parts a day, whether you're doing like an upper or lower split, whether you're like a push-pull leg split, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. There could be maybe a little bit of scientific data that shows one way is slightly better than the other, but at the end of the day, it's so minuscule, and I would say it doesn't really matter. So what I would say to that, find something you can stick to and that you enjoy doing, because that's the main thing at the end of the day. And one of my friends and clients actually asked me, kind of like a 4-day or 5-day split, what's better, what should I do? And I told them, honestly, we'll try one way. If you enjoy it, let's stick with it. If not, let's go back to the old way, because at the end of the day, it's all about finding that sustainability. So overrated, to sum it up slightly. Of course, you don't want to be doing like calves on Monday, biceps Tuesday, stuff like, you obviously need to get those major compound lifts into that split. But for the most part, I would say a little bit overrated. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think you're going to be a little surprised because I'm the traditional bro split kind of guy, but I'm going to say overrated as well. And the reason I'm going to say overrated is because of a specific demographic, and that is younger guys, or just men in general. How about that? I think men in general, when they start to exercise, they start to go to the gym, they automatically jump into this, we keep saying bro split, because they want to start to build their arms and build their chest. So they'll do a lot of isolation movements on these very small muscles without actually building a foundation. So I think for the vast majority of people, you want to, like, full body workouts are great. So full body workouts where you're working compound movements, so big muscles, lots of muscles, strong muscles, that's where you're going to build that foundation. So for people just starting out, I think it's important to work on these compound movements, the meat and potatoes, and the bro split or any split is really good once you get to a level where you have that foundation set and you're able to kind of choose specifically what you want to improve on. So the typical bro split is great for bodybuilding, just for physique, but it's only good if you already have a solid foundation. So if you're just starting to work out, I would highly encourage either full body workouts or what Rich said, an upper lower. That way you can still include a lot of the main lifts. So while I love workout splits, I think for the majority of people, especially a lot of guys starting out, I'm gonna say overrated.
Yeah, I love that context to it as well. I love that context to talk about the beginners who are just starting out, because if you are just starting out, chances are you don't want to jump into a bodybuilding split 5 to 6 times a week. That's going to hammer your body, it's going to tax your body. So if you're just starting out, it can potentially be underrated, because maybe you want to do 3 full body workouts a week, what Sean's kind of talking about, or if you're doing 4 times a week, maybe an upper lower split would be a little more valuable opposed to just kind of breaking down the body part. But yeah, I love that context provided. If you have experience, I'd say it's definitely overrated. If you're just starting out, like Sean said, it can be potentially underrated, but I hope you kind of see there's so many variables that kind of come in here. But as a general sense, I think we both agree it's definitely a little bit overrated.
Yep.
Ready for your next question?
Let's do it.
I like this one. This one's a bit of a tricky one, so it's gonna stump Sean here maybe. Working out the same muscle group every day for 5 days straight. Overrated or underrated? It's a tough one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It really depends on the context.
Yeah. To have some context for sure here.
I'm going to say underrated. I'm going to say underrated for the same reason I said underrated for Peloton. Because if you're working the same muscle every day for 5 days a week, that means you're working out 5 days a week, which is fantastic. It's going to be overrated if you train each muscle group really hard every day. If you're going heavy and if you're doing a lot of volume, then you need to give it time to recover. But if you're only doing a few sets per muscle group each day, you can definitely do that and recover. It ultimately comes down to your level of fitness and your ability to recover. But again, what's the best case scenario versus worst case scenario? Best case scenario means you're working out 5 days a week, and chances are you're not doing heavy squats and deadlifts 5 days a week. Chances are, even if you are working the same muscle groups, that you're going to be able to recover. And realistically, you'll be able to know if you're not recovering. Like, burnout's a real thing, but I think a lot of people talk about overtraining and not recovering enough, but it requires a lot more training and a lot more intensity than people actually realize to get to the point where you're overtraining. So it can definitely be a negative if you're training at the type of volume that needs more recovery, but I think for the vast majority of people, that's just not the case. So I'm gonna say underrated. I have no problems working out the same muscle groups every day as long as you're not only working quad, and nothing else. But if you're doing full body and there's a little bit of everything every day, no problem at all.
Yeah, I was kind of torn to answer this one myself, kind of over or underrated. I was kind of right in the middle because it's a kind of an interesting question, but ultimately I am going with slightly underrated because of the factors you just mentioned, of course, in terms of working out, you're in your workouts 5 times per week, which is a great thing. And like Sean said, as long as you're not just hammering your muscle groups, let's say if you're doing squats, heavy squats on Monday, yeah, you're probably not going to do heavy squats on Tuesday. Then that'll of course be overrated as there's so many variables that kind of come into play. But if you strategically, hit your muscle groups a few sets, and you're not really working on the eccentric, so basically slowing down the lowering phase, that's known to cause a lot of muscle soreness in the previous days. So as long as you're kind of strategic about it, maybe do like a couple sets of biceps on, let me rephrase that. Maybe do 4 sets of squats on Monday, maybe Tuesday you do 1 or 2, Wednesday. As long as you can manipulate those variables around, I would say it's underrated because of the context I think Sean provided, that you are working out 5 times per week and you can still definitely get a stimulus that way. Now, of course, if your goal is maximum muscle growth / hypertrophy, same thing, then yeah, you're probably going to want to split up a little bit more in terms of like an upper-lower split or a push-pull-leg split. But for the most part, even we utilize this in Bootcamp where we have 5 full body workouts a week, and on some days we emphasize more the quads, some days we emphasize more the hamstring glutes, and I think there's no problem with that at all, and you can definitely get a good stimulus from that. And out of that at all, or?
No, I agree. I think Rich is right. I think the one exception would be if you're, and this is if you're really dialed in, but if you're trying to build muscle, I think that might be the one exception where it might help to go really hard on the days that you're training, but also give yourself a couple days in between where you can recover. But if you're just training for overall health, if you're training for fat loss or for recomp, I don't see an issue with it at all, assuming you're not going at the volume Rich was discussing earlier. So no, I think we both kind of agree with that one.
Exactly. Definitely some context to there, but for the most part, as a general rule of thumb, definitely I would say slightly underrated. I think you have the last question for me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear this one.
I think you know exactly what you're going to say, but I think a lot of people who maybe don't listen to you quite as often might be a little surprised. I think the general public would probably feel a different way. I might be totally wrong about your assumption here, but the last one is going to be stretching.
Okay, stretching, normal, just like static stretching.
Just stretching.
Okay, so I'll try not to go too much of a rabbit hole here, but I'll give you my overrated, underrated answer first, and I'll kind of dive into what I mean. So stretching, kind of like static stretching, hold and stretch, for 30, 45 seconds to a minute, I would definitely say it's overrated. So, like I said, without going in a rabbit hole too much, there's something called mobility and there's something called flexibility. So static stretching, which the question is kind of talking about, is flexibility. It's basically just kind of like a passive motion where we're using our body or using a tool to kind of get ourselves in a position, and there's no really active control to it. Mobility, there's a strength component to it. It's flexibility and strength, and you're basically taking your joints to an active range of motion. So for example, something like a wall angel or a 90-90, where you're controlling that range of motion without the use of assistance. Flexibility, there's no really long-term research to show that flexibility is going to help increase the length of a muscle. Mobility is for sure. And this is to say you cannot use flexibility in terms of increasing your muscle length. And here's what I'll give you a bit of some context to it. if you're trying to improve your overall range of motion, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing some flexibility, so stretching beforehand. Let me explain. So, for example, we're trying to improve our overhead motion and we're tight in our lats or our chest. There's no problem just kind of stretching our chest a little bit. But what I talked about earlier, mobility, there's an active component to it. So you can do flexibility, but you want to follow it up with something active. It's kind of like hitting the save button on the computer. If you just do flexibility without the active control, it's going to be short-term gains for about 10 to 30 minutes, and it's going to go away. It's going to be exactly the way you felt the next day previous to stretching. But if you do mobility with that new range of motion you created by doing the flexibility, then that's kind of hit the save button and you have that active control to it. I hope that kind of makes sense. I know I tried to do my best not going down a rabbit hole too much there. I can talk about that for an hour. But at the end of the day, yes, I'd say flexibility is definitely overrated, because just because a muscle feels tight as well does not mean we need to stretch it. Sometimes it's all about creating good stiffness elsewhere in the body, opposed to stretching with whatever feels tight. What would you say, Sean?
Well, this one's obviously right up your alley, so I don't want to get too much into it. I'm going to say it's overrated as well. And one thing I will note is sometimes tightness is a good thing, right? Sometimes tightness is there for a reason. It's a protective mechanism. So if you're trying to stretch out an area that is quote unquote tight, you might actually do more harm than good. It can be like kind of ripping off a Band-Aid that hasn't stopped bleeding yet. So like Rich said, there's a big difference between stretching and mobility. Sometimes if an area is tight, I'm not even going to get into it because it's not my area of expertise, but stretching inherently is not always good. I think it's intentional stretching and intentional mobility that can be a good thing. And in order to know what to do, you need to talk to a coach who actually is familiar with this. So Rich is really good with this stuff. A lot of physio chiropractors are really good with this stuff, and some trainers as well. So before you think that just because an area is tight that you have to stretch it to make it better, make sure that you actually understand where the root cause is. So I'm going to say overrated for that reason, but I agree with Rich. Mobility is generally underrated.
Yeah, I don't know how many times. That's fantastic said. I'm just going to give you some examples so you guys know exactly what Sean's talking about. I don't know how many times people go to me and say, Rich, my hip flexor is so tight, I need to stretch. And I know the individual, they're hypermobile. I know that person has lots of mobility to them. So what I'll say is, okay, let's do a Thomas test, which is basically a test to measure hip flexor length. And they basically pass with flying colors, and there's no restriction at all in the area. So just because something feels tight, again, that could be a protective mechanism. So the hip flexors attach to the lower back. So if that's tight, it's probably a signal that it's saying something else is wrong. Maybe we're going to create a little more core stiffness. Whatever the reason is, there's just so many factors that can go into tightness, and just because you are tight does not mean the muscle is short, and does not mean that the muscle needs more stretching. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Any add to that at all?
I think that pretty much covers it. So I guess for anyone listening or watching, the question that we want you to answer is, Rich Fit Podcast, overrated or underrated?
Hopefully you guys give me some underrated thumbs up here, but it's overrated. No broken hearts, no hard feelings here. But that basically concludes our podcast. I really enjoyed it. That was a fun discussion with Sean. And if you guys have any questions at all, like at the end of the episode, feel free to contact one of us. Feel free to message, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. I'll be back with another episode next week, I just say. And thanks so much, guys. Take care and have yourself a great day.